Should I clap? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I thought you'd never ask. I love doing the clap. It's nice, isn't it?
New Rules is part of WeTransfer's ongoing series, which aims to demystify the ever-changing landscape of the creative industries, this time the film industry. In this episode, we're finding out about funding. Securing financing is a critical challenge for any independent filmmaker. As traditional funding avenues shift, filmmakers must adapt to bring their vision to life. In this discussion, we'll explore the current state of funding, highlighting its pitfalls and uncovering new opportunities, and generally sharing our panel's experience to help turn a no into a yes. In conversation, we have Charlotte Regan, writer, director, and wildly prolific video director, a fresh voice in independent cinema. Her debut feature, Scrapper, won the Grand Jury Prize in the World Cinema category at Sundance. Joy Gharoro-Akpojotor is a producer and filmmaker known for her work on Blue Story, directed by Rapman, Boxing Day. She's the co-founder of Joy Productions, a production company focused on telling stories that are black and queer-led. Rich Peppiatt is a filmmaker and former journalist known for his satirical documentary One Rogue Reporter. His debut narrative feature, Kneecap, had its world premiere at Sundance, the first ever Irish language movie to do so, and has opened to rave reviews. Thank you so much for joining us. So today we're exploring funding. In each of your different roles, at which stage of a project do you start thinking about funding?
I think it's kind of changed as I've kind of learnt more about the industry. So I used to not think about it at all, and my producer would think about it, which sounds really lazy. And I just feel like whatever, if it gets made, it gets made. But now I'm more conscious of it when I'm writing the ideas. I wonder if they are like ideas that are capable of getting finance or not, and where we would go for that finance. So it's become something I think about a lot more, which is kind of a shame because I think it changes the writing process in lots of ways.
Is it a bit more of a burden, thinking about that process as well as your own personal expression?
My mum always says whenever I say anything's a burden that it's not that deep and we're just making films. So she reminds me to not say any of my job is a burden because I'm not saving anyone's life. So I've just got her voice in my head like, shut up, Charlie, it's not a burden. But yeah, it is something that kind of changes the ideas I'm writing, I guess. And I think that's a shame because I think I'm so conscious of, it's like a second album thing, isn't it? Where you're like, ooh, audiences like this. And I think actually when you make your first film, you don't have any of that and you're just making it to make it, and I think that's why sometimes like the films go downhill after the first one, which is what...
Don't tell me that.
Joy, you're more typically in the producer role, although you've now directing. At what point do you come on and are you constantly thinking about the funding aspect as you're hearing an idea?
We like to come on super early on projects, mainly because of like where we're going to get it made. So when somebody pitches an idea or sends us something, the first thing we think about is who's going to want this and how are we going to make it. Obviously we're like, oh, we want to be like free and just love stories, but we also have to think about money. But I do think like, you know, your first feature is where you're really allowed to just go wild to an extent. And then after that, your second feature, everyone's like, okay, now you got to be serious. Make us money back.
Someone working on their second feature, do you think trying to get funding can actually help you focus the idea as you have to articulate it so well to get funding?
The fact of the matter is that the earlier you take money, that costs you something, and that is control. The later in a process you can hold off taking anyone's money, the more control you have. And so, you know, in an ideal world, if you had a script which you've completely spec'd and that you're in a position to then take that to market, you're in a stronger creative position than if you've taken money very early on from a production company or a funder. It means that they're going to have a say in you developing that work and the direction it takes because they put money in. And so I think as long as you go into that with your eyes open, you know, some people... Me, I've never been in a position where I can sit there and just go, oh, I'm just going to sit here for 6 months and work on a script for no money, right? And so you're kind of just by necessity kind of put in a position where you have to involve a funder quite early on. Yeah, I just think it's important that you know, filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers are aware of the trade-off that comes in that early money.
I mean, with Scrapper, you had done a lot of short films and a lot of music videos. What was your funding process?
We started Scrapper on iFeatures, which I don't think is around anymore, but it was this like incredible scheme where I think they took like 12 projects, and before us it used to be like a bit Hunger Games where at the end they would fund 2 and the other 10 would just be like thrown to the wayside. But then luckily on the year we were on it, I think, that could be wrong, it was the year where it was at the end the BFI and the BBC would just decide if they wanted to take your projects onto their slate. So we had quite a lot of early support with iFeatures, not like money that you can like, you know, get by on or just solely write that script on, but it was, yeah, nice to have the support of commissioners early on, because I think that engages them in the project a little bit earlier, especially when it's places like BFI and BBC where it feels like their end goal is to let you make a film that really like represents you and like who you are as an artist, more so than they're not thinking like how are you going to smash the box office or whatever. So when they came on board really early, it was pretty helpful, and they shaped the project for years. We were writing it for like 3 years, I want to say, so it was a long time. Yeah.
I think sometimes, you know, although funding, you know, for the arts is always on the decline, there's never enough of it. That's certainly true. We are lucky to have a system where at least there is a route, right? That you can kind of, you know, as Charlotte said, you can get that first film potentially made if the idea is good enough that you can get your voice out there and kind of like put your stamp on things and go, this is me on screen. And I think that's important for building a career, is that you stand out as a filmmaker.
Do you have a lot of experience in the grants? And are there certain types of films that are good bets for that kind of funding?
I think it's about finding filmmakers who have something to say and who, especially in the early stages, are not that concerned about like, how am I going to make money? It's just about like, I have this project that I really want to say. You really have to know what your story is, and you have to know who it's for, and you have to know why you want to say it, and you have to know why now.
I mean, do you have good pitching tips? Can you pitch me your pitching tips?
Well, I tell you what, here was the big revelation for me, was when I was pitching Kneecap. I was like, I need to make this happen. I'm all in on this, and if it doesn't work out, I'm screwed. And it was very much, I changed my tact from going into places going, excuse me, sir, can I have some money, to, I'm making this film. Are you in? Right? And that change of like, stop talking about like films in the maybe, like if you give me some money, then maybe we can make this, to, I'm doing this thing. Start speaking in the definitive. This thing is happening. The train is leaving the station. You getting on or you're not getting on? And that change like was a revelation.
How about your pitching process? Is it something you've got better at with time, do you think?
No, I think I'm like getting progressively worse at it. I'm more like, even like when we found out about something recently, I was like, are you sure though? Because it's a bit shit, isn't it? Some of it, you know, so is it a good thing to make? Like I would question that, you know. I just assume after a few knockbacks, I assume that project isn't good enough. And then I don't even, there's one at the minute that I've brought it back to life, but then I'm a bit in this worried space of, is it coming back to life? Because Scrapper did okay. So are people looking at it with a different lens? And not looking at it, you know, with enough harshness. So I actually get worried about the projects coming back. I'm like, I don't want to get it funded just based on like empty hype or whatever, because if it's shit, it shouldn't be made, you know, if it should stay in the drawer. So I'm probably, yeah, getting worse. I don't know that I have any great tips or anything like that. I think the same with Scrapper, I waited until Eva at the BBC told me I had to do a feature because I'd done too many shorts, so I'm more the other way around. I'm like, no, I'm not ready. I need to do 35 shorts before the feature's ready. So it was kind of the other way around where Eva was like, you're doing too many shorts, like, you got to move on at some point. Yeah, so no, good tips.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because the romantic idea is that you have your idea and that you should just run with it for so many years and it will finally get made, but maybe it's just not the right time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think also, like you're saying about pitching, you really have, definitely from producer's point of view, you kind of have to go in there and be like, we're making this, are you coming or not? Because I think people we find that financiers want to feel like, oh, the train's moving and you may not need us, and we might get left behind. We don't want to get left behind. We want to be part of it. It's like a whole, like, it's mind games. But I think in my experience so far, the projects where we've got in and it feels like we're making it, everyone is like, oh, okay, we're making it, let's go. And from my point of view, it's always a case of you got to do that one film or whatever it is for everyone else to feel like, oh, you can do those other ideas. Because sometimes with the other ideas, it might just be like, the budget is too big at the time. But when you've done a film and they're like, oh, I did well, and you bring the other ideas back out, then they feel like you can get bigger cast or you can bring in more money. Nothing is ever dead. And there's never really a no. I always say, like, I could get 10 no's. It's just the wrong people. And to be honest with you, the industry is always just going around in circles. So, like, right now, everyone is like, oh, we don't want, like, limited TV series. In 2 years, they're going to want it again. It's like swings and roundabouts.
I also think it's important that, you remember who gave you the nose, right? Remember who gave you the nose, because I tell you what, when you actually get that thing away and they come up to you and they're like, we need to be involved in your next thing, remember. Because I think it's important. I think it's an important thing is to bear in mind the people who backed you early, the people who were there at the beginning. It's very easy to get wrapped up when bigger companies, start turning up and you go, well, where were you when I was sending an email and you never respond? You know what I mean? It's like, and personally for me, it's something that it's very important to me is to be loyal to the people who gave you that chance and were there, even if it was just a matter they never did any work with you, but they'd respond to an email, they'd have a dialogue with you. Do you know what I mean? You'd send them ideas and they'd come back, it's not quite for us, but here's a bit of feedback. That stuff when you're starting out is something that's really important because otherwise a lot of the time you can feel like you're just sending emails and things out into the ether.
And I also think those people are also the ones who they're on the same wavelength, they get your work. So it just means that down the line, if you're working with them, it's an easier conversation, it's an easier dialogue than people who just come in later on, like the glory hunters, and just like, okay, so here's X amount of cash, come do something else. Because I feel like going that way sometimes makes your life so much harder, just in terms of your career in the long run, and it can kill a few dreams.
Can the no's be constructive as well, though? Can they help you tailor your project?
100%. And also, I think with no's, it's like, what is the no behind the no? You kind of have to decipher sometimes. But I think what we tend to do is, like, if we get like 6-5 no's or whatever, we look at it objectively and then figure out what the common theme is amongst all of them. And then we can take that and go and like look at the project, figure it out, and just think, is that a direction we want to go?
Is building your community a really important part of being able to access funding? Charlotte, you've been working with your producer, Theo, for quite a long time. Tell us about how important has building your community and a good relationship with your producer been for your funding journey?
I think it doesn't just impact like getting finance on a film. I think it also impacts the impact the film has or how it's received, because like Joy's saying, like going with those financiers, they're like so embedded in the industry and they've seen this journey hundreds of times before. They've done it so much, so they really know how to protect you and how to make a film that places you in the best position to continue your career, like you're saying with the National Lottery money and the money that doesn't have to be made back in box office. Their whole thing is like, how is this going to represent you and how is it going to do best for your career? As well, I've had some friends who have taken more like private money for first films and things like that, and the films are incredible, but they don't have those financiers at the centre of it, kind of talking to people at festivals or telling people in the industry it's a great film, so getting like a community like that involved early on, even if it takes you like 20 plus knockbacks, I would always go the traditional financing way, just so that you end up with those people, because they're the ones that are going to kind of protect you and tell you when it's ready. And the same with, Theo's very blunt and great at telling me a project's like pure shite, so I think it's hard, it kind of gets harder to get that, what you're saying about loyalty as well, once you know, once Kneecap's received so great, and then you meet up with these other people, like they're less kind of inclined to tell you that something you're doing isn't great.
I absolutely second what Charlotte's just said. I think it's absolutely true. And look, with producers, look, there's producing is that area of the industry that traditionally there's fewer people go into it naturally, right? That actually it's like finding good producers is a difficult thing, right? And being lumbered with a bad producer, and I've had them, right, is really difficult because it makes the whole experience of making a film a nightmare, to be frank. They have, you know, they hold a lot of power, and you end up in a situation where you're trying to make your film in spite of someone, right, rather than with them. But you know, a good producer is someone who, you know, in the trenches, right, which is, you know, that day when everything's going to absolute shit, and they can either run away from the danger or they can run towards it and protect you, and you know, and when you find those people, keep them close, because most people are the run away from the danger people, right? And ultimately when things go wrong, they will look to point the finger and they will look to protect themselves, and a good producer understands part of the role is to protect you as the filmmaker, and a bad producer just sees everything through the lens of what's best for them. It is important as well to, if you can, be at an early stage funding wise plugged into people within the industry rather than just private money, because I've seen that happen too. You can make that film with just your mate's dad who happens to you know, have a fat load of cash and know what to do with. But once you've made it, there is, unfortunately, I don't think this is necessarily a healthy thing, but it just is what it is, the ecosystem of the film world. The funders, the public funders know all the people from the festivals, you know people in the... So you're within that world then, where from an early stage, when the film is in script stage, they're talking to people and you know, seeding the fact this film's coming down the pipe, this is something we're excited about. Whilst a thing that comes completely out of left field and goes, oh, here's a film that's just been made and no one had freaking even was aware that it was being... Look, here's this film. It just comes a bit out, you know, it's very difficult then to kind of plug that into the system.
Can something that might seem like a weakness to some people in terms of putting money in actually be its superpower? For example, your film is in Irish, but that seems like it's been such a big part of it, taking money from different Irish film funds.
Yeah, I mean that wasn't something that we set out to do. Like, oh, hang on, if we do it in Irish, we can tap into some money. But it was a nice consequence of that. That actually you realise a couple of things: is that public money is often is targets underrepresented voices often, right? And so if you're making a film that is telling stories that are on the periphery, there tends to be a more favourable look at that rather than if you're making Rambo 8. Okay, like we've kind of know that story, but you know, for me making Kneecap, it was about, you know, Irish language speakers living in Belfast. It was a world that felt like no one had ever really put a camera on, and I think that for public funders, their ears go up a bit because it's like it just ticks some boxes really. And as I said, it wasn't deliberate; it just happened. I stumbled across it and was like, right, cool, I want to tell this story, but. You know, we ended up, to get to our budget, we ended up putting together, there was 11 different funders to get to our budget. And that involved everyone as diverse as the BFI, through to Screen Ireland, Northern Ireland Screen, the Irish Language Broadcast Fund. You know, there was all sorts of different kind of bits of money that we got, and there was a consequence of that as well. That obviously you get to when you're making, well, at a script stage, you're getting lots of different notes.
Well, they're all part of the edit as well, all of them.
Not every single one, but there was a core group of maybe 6 or 7 who were kind of notes givers, and you know, that's difficult as a filmmaker to get 6 or 7 different sets of notes on a, you know, especially when what the Irish Language Broadcast Fund want the film to be, or think the film is not necessarily the same as what the BFI think the film is. So there's a lot of saying, no, no thank you, I appreciate that, but no. And then you have to be strong at that. I think that's part of the process is, you know, you have to just be able to be, no, thank you, and stand your ground, and, you know, come out and hopefully you're vindicated at the end, or you're not.
No, can't wait for them.
because of you.
With Scrapper, you had less funders, but how was the process of working with them?
Yeah, it was a similar thing where we'd still have conflicting notes. You know, everyone has a totally different creative opinion, and when you sit in and edit, a film can be 1,000 different films. You know, you could take it in so many different ways. So to get everyone to align is always really hard. But I think when we went into it, I was really, I don't know why, I think I'd just like seen too many people talk about like pre-selling films and how that starts to have an impact on the opinions. So I was always really adamant that we stay under a certain budget level, which obviously really stressed Theo, my producer, out. But yeah, I didn't want to kind of get distribution before it was made as well. I think especially when you're making your first film, people don't really know what your style is, you know, because your shorts are kind of all over the place, really. So you can get people that come on board based on a script or based on a treatment or a pitch that have got a totally different idea of what the film is. And then once you deliver an edit, they're like, oh God, what's that? That's not what we said we wanted to make. Especially when you're making your first film, where the edit is such a discovery process, the shoot is such a process, so it's not what it is on the page at all. It definitely wasn't for me with like streetcast kids just saying whatever they wanted all the time, and we were just letting them do what they wanted. But BBC and BFI were like Eva from the BBC in particular was just incredible, and I couldn't have done it without her. I think I like the support of someone like that because I'm very unsure of my ideas and my writing. So having someone like that who kind of protects you from those additional voices as well, you know, she's like, you kind of find an anchor, don't you? You find someone you really trust, and often that's your producer, but then you find like an exec who's like your person. And Eva and Farhana, who was at the BFI but is now at Film 4, I just really trusted their creative opinions. So I knew that whatever they said to me, it was coming from the best place, as where the other opinions I would kind of like pinch of salt them a little bit, yeah. Not that they weren't great, obviously, great opinions.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I think it's nice for new filmmakers to hear that there are also insecurities and a whole process behind it, but it feels like such a confident film.
Oh yeah, I feel like none of us have a clue. You don't have a clue when you make it, and then you get festival rejections and you're like, oh, I've made a piece of shit. And then you get into festivals and then you have the premiere. I'm sure you had it, I came to yours, and it's like, you have that moment where you're like, oh God, is everyone gonna hate this? So the whole process.
I was too drunk to have that thought, to be honest. I just breezed straight through it. No, look, I think that is one thing to always bear in mind is there's no one in the industry who has all the answers and knows everything or anything, really. And I think that it's like, it does help to be able to bear that in mind when you're talking to people. Is don't think just because someone's senior in the industry that somehow automatically they not liking your work or giving you a note that they don't like something suddenly instantly means they're right. Because everyone's bluffing it. Everyone is bluffing it. I'm bluffing it. Like, we're all bluffing it. You know, I think film can sometimes feel like a very hierarchical thing, and I don't really feel it needs to be that way.
You worked on Blue Story with Rapman. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how that film came to be.
How I came on board was actually Damien Jones. Like, he emailed me because I'd made a different short film called Haircut, and he was looking for a producer to work Blue Story with. We met up, we talked. I heard a Shara story, and he hadn't gone out yet to anyone. He was just like, got this thing, do you want to work on it with me? And for me, it was like, this is like a great way to learn, because I'd only done like no budget feature films. I think I'd done like 2 feature films for like 35K. We went to like the BBC first, and Rose Garner, it was the time she was there, she was like, yeah, we're on board. They were the first ones on board. And then we just went to like every single studio in town. And I think that's where like I learned, like, because Damien's very much like, the train's moving, we're going. So we went to every single person, and he was like, yeah, this is happening. Are you on board? Are you on board? We're moving, we're moving. I think that was a really great way to just learn. But yeah, so we ended up with Paramount, but it was an experience of like a week just going to everyone and just like, we're making this. I think we told everyone we're making it in like 4 months. I was like, are we? Okay, we are. I guess we're making it in 4 months. So that was a fun experience. And the good thing about Damien was that he was always like, anything you want to know, just tell me. Like, no question is stupid. It's a great way to learn. And he also just let me run the set, because he didn't want to be like hands-on, so I got to like do everything myself. So it was just more about bringing in people, the right people, and also letting people feel like, whilst we're super low budget, they had a voice. So everyone's idea was welcome. We managed to find the right people who were putting like 200% in to make it feel like it was a studio film. Because I feel like we couldn't make that film now, not on the money they gave us. We couldn't make it now.
How do you think the funding landscape has changed over the past few years?
It's less money. Everyone wants something commercial, just want something guaranteed. Whereas I feel like a few years ago, they were all about the art. They were all about like you as a filmmaker, a talent. Now it's kind of like you as a talent, but also what else are you bringing to the table? Going in as for first-time features, you kind of have to go in now with like your lead cast already attached, as opposed to before where you just go in and then you go off and cast because they love the project. Now it's like, but who's your lead? Or if you had a script, no director attached, it was kind of okay, but now it's like, oh, but who's the big name that's going to come in and direct it? I just think things have slightly shifted. It might probably shift back to what it was before because we'll all get tired of quote unquote commercial and want talent again and just art, but that's what I find.
How is the business of funding shorts, and is it harder?
I think it's harder now, yeah, because there's not a lot of short film funds anymore. You just got like the BFI Film Network. I think that's it.
I mean, the shorts I've done 3 shorts, and all of them were funded by. I used to make commercials, branded content stuff, and I would just take money from those jobs and just use them for shorts. When it comes to shorts, I think a lot of people get stuck in that moment where they're waiting for permission, right? They're waiting for someone to give them some money, to give them permission to go make a film. And some people that works for, but most people it ain't gonna work for you. Like you have to go out there yourself and just do it somehow. Find a way, right? Find a way of, but you know, it wasn't just the fact of doing commercial work that put a bit of money that I could do it, but the relationships you built up. So if you're putting money in people's pockets by hiring them as a DOP on a branded content thing, right? Then if you give them a few jobs, and it's easier to turn around to them and go, look, mate, can you do me a favour? I'm doing this short. Would you come and do it for chuff, basically, or very low? And people go, yeah, right. But it's hard to go to someone who you're not working with and expect crew to do things for free, because for most crew it's just a job and they don't get the credit for what they're doing anyway. It doesn't progress their career to be the third AD on a short, right? Yeah. Particularly. So it's like people want to get paid, and that's fair enough.
Are different types of streaming platforms offering any types of new opportunities?
I would say they're quite risk averse. I don't think they're not really homes often for new talent, I would say. Do you know what I mean? It's like they come to to people once they've made a couple of things, and I don't look at Netflix and Amazon and see kind of necessarily they're pushing the envelope in terms of there's a lot of stuff that's very, very safe. You know what I mean? And just very middle of the road. And I think you do very well to get your first feature or whatever. That said, my first documentary back in 2014 ended up on Netflix as but that was kind of a different landscape back then. On that, I made my first documentary in 2014. My next feature-length film is come out in 2024, right? So it's 10 years between there. And I thought in 2014, I was like, I'm freaking in here. Like, you know what I mean? I'm smashing this, right? Easy. And it took 10 years. I remember someone saying to me, this industry, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And a lot of people fall by the wayside because they can't deal with the marathon, right? They can't deal with the level of rejection over such a long period of time. And you need to ask yourself, can you do that? Are you prepared to keep going? Despite how many knocks you take, can you find a way to keep going? Because they're the people eventually who pop out the other side and actually make stuff, and suddenly you become an overnight success. And people don't see that you've been working away 10, 15 years behind the scenes. And so I think that's the question to people out there, is like, how much do you really want this? Or do you want it easy? Or are you prepared to really do the slog?
But does the lack of funding exclude certain people with less funds to fall back on?
It's a hard one, because I think it's an industry where there is so much limited funding. And like, you know, like Rich was saying, we are lucky that we have access to public finance, to a lot of soft money, because when you look at other countries, there is no sort of like safety net. There is nothing. It's just sort of, you got to be commercial, you got to go and then you just got to make your film. I think what is good about us here is that through these, like whether it's BBC, BFI, whoever it is, they are creating more accessibility to funding. Because I think there was a point in which like the BFI was sort of actively looking at projects from people who they hadn't funded before, because they were mindful of always giving money to the same people. So I think you have certain financiers who are much more open-minded about how to fund, who they're funding, and also what they're funding. But I also think we also have to remember it is film business, so there is the reality of when people are giving money, they want to know that they can, some level, get that money back.
Have you ever had experience of taking money from people you thought were the wrong people in the end?
This film related or just generally?
In life?
That Albanian mafia that's after me at the moment.
I think sometimes you just have to know how your money comes together and if it all makes sense. And yes, you may have to reduce your budget slightly. And I think one of the things that we are always mindful of, like when we go into anything, we have we have two different budgets. We have like our ideal budget. We've also got our worst case scenario budget. So even if a financier has to drop out, especially if we know going into a situation, these financiers might not all get on. Like, you know, people sometimes pull out when you're about 2 weeks from shoot. It happens. Up until your film is closed, that money is not guaranteed. So we have to keep in mind that, and I'm always one of those worst case scenario people. So I always feel like...
Good producer.
I'm always going, oh, it's never going to work out, guys. Up until it works out.
Not in the pitching room.
No, in the picture, I'm like, guys, we're all going to make so much money off this film. It's going to be amazing.
Well, I remember when I was making Kneecap, I had to go in and you know, I always get the question, you know, you're making a film with a hip-hop band. Can they act? And I'm like, yeah, they can act. And I got no idea, like absolutely no, until like, you know, literally a few months before we were filming. I still had no idea. We were funded. And I was like, I think I need to actually see if these boys can act. And they couldn't act, right? And I was like, oh, bugger, I'm really up the swan here. And, you know, had to kind of crash course in acting to get there. So, yeah, things have been said in the pitching process. I think all of us have said things in the pitching process.
Went
which,
true.
You know, it has to be done.
Is knowing what amount to ask for kind of a skill? I mean, you were talking about how you didn't want to get the budget too high so you could retain control. Is that a really important part of the process?
I feel like it's such a great skill of a producer, but then I feel like I read a lot of projects from young people in particular that have like no understanding of like what is spent on different things, you know, and I think that really makes them struggle because they write these shorts, they're like, so basically, Joy, it's an apocalypse, and I'm like, cool, that's expensive already, and it's just like writing to budget, and I think and being like willing and not precious to rewrite as well, because there was a lot of ideas we had in Scrapper that, like, we got to it, and it's like there's just not the money, or you can do it in a cheap way and it's gonna look like total shit. So it's like then you need to rewrite, and I think a lot of people kind of aren't down for it and they stick because they're like, I'm an auteur and it has to be what it is, you know. So I think being able to write actually to what places are offering is a skill instead of you going somewhere, but this is me being not confident enough and not get on the train way. I think I will sometimes be aware of the places we're going to and what their kind of usual budget levels are. You know, that's why you have like general meetings and they kind of tell you, you know, we fund 5 to 10 mil projects or we fund 2 to 5. And so then I will kind of cater my ideas slightly to that, or I would be willing to rewrite based on that. And obviously anything else can change, you cast whoever and they're spenny. But yeah, just being able to write to budget I think is a useful skill that like young filmmakers in particular, especially in the short film space, could do with doing. You know, those like 1 or 2K projects that we've all done, like I don't get sent many of them. When I'm being sent short films, everything's so expensive that people are writing that they're sending me.
That my first short film was literally just set in a mate's flat, because that was all. We literally had no money, so it was just like, and it was shite, to be honest. But it wasn't. But you know, and that's the other thing is like, you know, the process of making shorts and things like that, you need to consider them as well as practice.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the first short I made was not great. I actually quite like it, but you know, we sent it off to Sundance, and you know, and then no, it was never, you know, it was like, you know, we got nowhere, I don't think, in the end. Sometimes I think you need to see the process of making shorts as they are a practice ground. So therefore, okay, keep it quite small, right? It doesn't need to be set in the apocalypse or outer space or something like that, but it is a process of finding your voice. You know, learning how to work with actors, for example, learning how to deal with a crew and all those sort of things. And if you approach it more like that, as a playful thing, rather than career-defining moments, like this short is going to set me into the stratosphere, it probably won't. But if you look at it as fun and play and kind of, and you approach people with that idea as well, it's a process of experimentation to try things that you know, maybe you're not seeing on TV or in film, just trying things out, then people are kind of more likely, I think, to get involved because they're like, okay, cool, like this sounds like it'll be fun.
And I also think sometimes it's all about like, just when it comes to feature films, just knowing that anything above like 2.5, 3, you have to start thinking about cost. Because I think, like I said, it's a business. So you get to a point in your budget and people are like, oh, so am I going to get that money back? Which means that you have to go into theatres, which means that people are going to come watch whoever's in your film. Because especially if you're a first-time filmmaker, and sometimes second-time filmmakers, people aren't coming because it's your name, you know. They're coming to see the story or who's in the film, and that's the reality. So I think when you are sort of like pitching films, you got to think about the budget level. You also got to think about realistically who can you get to be in it. And I think when it comes to, equally with shorts, it's such a great training ground. And sometimes we also get sent shorts where I'm like, why are you driving cars all around London? Just be in the house. Like just go get a mate's house and spend like 3 days in a house, 2 days in a house, a weekend. But because it's all about character, it's all about like the emotional connection the audience can feel from the short. No one really cares about big set pieces. They just want to know, like, can you tell a good story and can you tell it in 10 minutes?
So looking to the future, do you think it's going to continue getting more difficult, or are there bright spots?
I think it will get better. I feel like we've been through this before, in that everyone get a bit bored of like this idea of everything is to be super commercial, because what does that even mean? I feel like we're also in the UK, we're in this weird place where we're in competition with America because we're English speaking, but actually we're not as commercial as they are. But we also think we're auteurs at the same time because we're next to Europe. So I feel like after a while, people are just going to want stories that are just amazing stories, which I think would be a nice place to be. And we don't have to care so much about the names you have to attach to the project. I think it just gives filmmakers a space to just tell amazing stories.
Are you feeling optimistic?
I am. I think there's been a lot of first features recently come out of the UK that have been like really risk-taking, because I think prior to that we were kind of stuck in this like working class kind of trauma cinema that we're known for in festivals. Like you go to festivals with anything but that and they're like, what, this is not a British film. But things like, you know, like Rylane was so different, and that's a first film, and that's insane for a first film. And I just think even like Horde that Luna made was different, or How to Have Sex was such a different film for British cinema. Like Kneecap is such a different early feature, and I just think things like that are gonna kind of change how festivals and how audiences around the world receive the films, you know, like how well these films are doing, like not just with reviews, but with, you know, box offices and things like that, I think will hopefully reflect on the financing.
I just think that for young filmmakers, or just filmmakers, you know, be young filmmakers trying to establish themselves, don't be asking for permission, don't be waiting to go, oh, hang on, it's a bad funding situation out there at the moment. I don't think it's my time. I think that you just have to just kind of take responsibility 100% yourself to find a way, and not go, you know, I don't think the landscape of the industry is good for me to, in a way that's excuses. And that's not to say that it's easy, because it's certainly not, but I think that ultimately, you know, there always is a way. There always is a way to do it if you're prepared to just, you know, bang your head against the wall enough times and knock on enough doors and badger enough people. Eventually you can find that way to do it, kind of outside of the traditional funding system, which you just can't rely on to be the catalyst for your career.
Just finally, are there any lessons that you've learned about funding that you know now you wish you'd known at the beginning?
No is never a no. Just depends on who you're speaking to.
This is more like negativity. I always wonder if, like, I don't think the problem is with like financing and how much is available. I think the problems come way before that with like getting different people into the industry, because if you're someone who's applying for financing, you're already in a privileged position of being surrounded by people who have maybe encouraged you to do art, which is like a privilege in itself, you know? So, you know, I do documentaries with young people on different estates across the UK and stuff, and you meet some kids and you can just tell they would like make better films than every single one of us, but they just aren't given, you know, that as a future. So beyond the financing, it's like, how do we access those communities that are being told that art is not a career? You know, it's, if you're applying, you know, you've got a laptop, you've got a parent who has maybe said it's okay to apply, or you're surrounded by a community that see art as a possible avenue, and that's like a small percentage of people, I feel.
My dad still sends me apprenticeships. He sent me an electrician apprenticeship the other day. Good to have a trade, son. And I'm like, Dad, I'm 39, I've got 2 kids, right? Chill. I'm not going to become an electrician, right? So, like, chill.
We all need electricians, though. We don't
We do,
all need
but
films.
it's got a point. It's got a point.
Smash
Yeah,
it
it's got a point.
financially. Yeah.
So it's a long-term career.
Secure. Yeah.
All right. Right.
Thank you so much for joining us and exploring the world of funding. It's been so inspiring talking to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.